Seriously, there's no way they're gonna keep going with this franchise, right? Hey everybody, welcome to Mainely Movies. Today I'm going to be ranking the 6 films of Sony's Spider-Man universe as part of my franchise Rankography series. If you're new here, please consider subscribing for a variety of movie-related content, like reviews, rank lists, and trailer reactions. So what is a rankography exactly? Well, it's my ranking of a filmography, whether that be a director's output, an actor's appearances, or even an entire franchise. My rankographies are based on personal preference, and I rank movies according to how much I enjoyed them, rather than any specific technical merit or attribute. Remember, this is just my ranking, not the ranking, so be sure to post your own personal ranking of the SSU in the comments below. Sony has been clinging on to their Spider-Man sliver of Marvel for dear life, and even though they've loaned the friendly neighborhood web-slinger to the MCU for the Tom Holland Spider-Man movies, they're not ready to give him up entirely. Instead, they decided they wanted in on the cinematic universe game and created what's now known as Sony's Spider-Man universe, or the SSU. Ironically, and perhaps a little counterintuitively, Spider-Man has yet to appear in the SSU, and instead, the franchise currently consists of 4 anti-hero focused films and 1 sort of reluctant hero film, that are all extremely influenced by superhero movies of the early 2000s. I've already reviewed all 6 of these movies on this channel, so if you want to check those out for some more in-depth thoughts on each of them, I'll put links in the description below, and also link most of them up in the cards as we go along. Alright, let's get this rankography started. Coming in at number 6, Morbius. I hate sounding blatantly negative right out of the gate, but this is one of those rankographies where the last place film is actually truly bad. I'll admit that I had very little interest in this movie going into it, but I still wanted it to be okay. And there was some potential here. Morbius is kind of an interesting character. Sort of what you might imagine Batman would be if he'd been bitten by a radioactive bat or something. And Jared Leto was even okay in the role. But man, is this a bad movie. Not just disappointing, not just underwhelming, but bad. Morbius was one of those films that had felt like it had been on the horizon forever. So many delays, so many pushbacks, and yet they didn't use any of that time to improve the film. Both the script and the editing are awful here, combining to create a shockingly unstructured film. Outside of this franchise, it's been a while since I saw a movie that was so poorly constructed. The story frequently borders on incoherent, scenes are just haphazardly thrown together in a way that genuinely feels random at times, and the characters have nothing to them, so the stakes of the film have zero impact. And then, of course, there's the action. The visual effects here are very much of a 2000s throwback nature, and let me tell you, they're rough to watch. There's so much speed ramping and cheesy slow motion. Plus, there's this blur effect that, when combined with the terrible editing, makes it impossible to follow or care about the movie's many swirl fights. Coming in at number 5, Madame Web. This movie is slightly better than Morbius, but not by much. Once again, we've got an extremely poorly structured film. The plot and story structure do feel a bit less random than those of its franchise predecessor, but this is still a jumbled mess. To be fair, finding a way to convey the concept of premonitions that's both visually interesting and easy to follow is a bit of a challenge, but it definitely felt like the filmmakers put in very little effort to overcome that challenge. What we have here is instead a tangled web of dreams, flashbacks, and fake-out style future visions. If it had been done well, this could have been a really interesting ability to see put in practice for a superhero, but it ends up feeling wasted here as part of a never-ending setup for a sequel that'll likely never come. As of right now, Madame Web is a bit of an outlier in the SSU. Not only is it the first film to focus on a female character, but it's also the first in which our protagonist isn't an anti-hero, and is instead a traditional hero. Sort of. Like I said, this movie is about 95% setup, so the heroics on display here are minimal, but Madame Web is unquestionably the good guy of the story. Unfortunately, the attempts to mix things up from the franchise norm don't help this film escape from the movie-crushing grasp of the SSU. There are some Spider-Man adjacent references and characters that feel shoehorned in, plus this film is set in 2003, seemingly as an additional way to try to capture that early 2000s feel that all the SSU films carry. But this movie falls more on on the Morbius side of that than the Venom side, with an exposition-heavy script that's exceptionally low on humor, fun, or enjoyable campiness, but high on very obvious rewrites, resulting in some of the worst ADR I've seen in a while. Seriously, you'd think you were watching a spaghetti western at times. Madam Web had some potential, but it's rare to come across a major studio release that's so half-assed and incompetently made. Coming in at number 4, Kraven the Hunter. It's not really saying much, but this is certainly the best of the non-Venom movies in the SSU. It's another anti-hero story, though with a bit more of an active vigilante tilt than most of the other films. I wasn't aware of this character before the film, but in doing some quick, admittedly superficial research, it seems like this film significantly deviates from the villainous comic origins of the character, to make him much more of an anti-hero. This is actually the only R-rated movie in the SSU, and that occasionally comes through in the action. Although many of the more bloody and brutal moments appear to be afterthought reshoot tack-ons, the action sequences overall are surprisingly entertaining. They definitely vary in quality. Some are good, some are endearingly and nostalgically goofy, and others are CGI-filled eye rollers, but I will say that the action here is better than most of what the rest of this franchise has to offer. But there's gotta be a reason why it's so low on this list, right? In fact, there are quite a few reasons. Once again, the writing is absolutely abysmal. It had some potential with the family-motivated vigilante story, but this screenplay is just a mess of tropes, cliches, and unoriginal ideas. Again, it has far too many villains for no reason whatsoever. Plus, the excessive exposition and awful dialogue make it hard for any actor to get through unscathed. Like the other films lower on this list, this movie is plagued by poor pacing, bad editing, obvious reshoots, and some horrible ADR. Add to that some laughably bad early 2000s quality animal CGI, and you've got yourself a movie that feels like it was given up on partway through production. No wonder this is rumored to be the final entry in the SSU. Coming in at number 3, Venom: The Last Dance. This isn't a great movie by any means, but the gap between this film and the non-Venom SSU films is pretty huge, which makes this movie look practically Criterion-worthy by comparison. That said, comparing this film to its two Venom predecessors quickly reveals why it's not part of the collection. While still enjoyable in many ways, this third and purportedly final Venom film is definitely the weakest of the trilogy. The stories have never been particularly well written, but this movie is a significant step down from its predecessor in that regard. It's certainly more cohesive than Morbius and Madam Web, but this is still a messy and randomly structured script that's very poorly paced and overloaded with exposition and dead-end plot threads. It also doesn't help that we've got yet another Venom film with an underwhelming villain. All these things hurt the film, resulting in a periodically dull watch, but between those periods of exposition-laden dullness, this still manages to be a fun film, at least for fans of the previous two Venoms. It's ridiculous and dumb and has that intentional cheesy 2000s vibe going on, but it mostly works. Like its predecessors, the primary reason for this is the relationship between Eddie and Venom. This movie does stray from them a bit more than the other two Venom films, but when it's focused on their banter-filled buddy road trip plotline, it really shines. Eddie is still a perpetually sweaty, disheveled mess, and Venom chimes in with funny interjections while constantly putting Eddie into increasingly silly and embarrassing situations. Their relationship has satisfyingly evolved over the course of these three films, each focusing on a slightly different facet of their partnership turned friendship. And if this is truly the last Venom film, I'm sad to see this entertaining duo end. Coming in at number 2, Venom: Let There Be Carnage. So this film was kind of a surprise for a number of reasons. First, it was surprising that we even got this sequel at all. The first Venom didn't do great at the box office, and with the long time gap, it seemed like the SSU was a bit of a non-starter. But Let There Be Carnage pushed on, and finally did get a release. In many ways, it's very much like its predecessor. It has that same campy cheesiness of a 2000 superhero movie, and also has a very similar type of humor. This is most prominent, once again, with the relationship between Eddie Brock and Venom. They've got the same silly, fun dynamic as before, but with a little bit more heart as they realize just how much they mean to each other. From a story perspective, this is actually more cohesive than the first film, which amazingly allows this movie to make sense within the context of the franchise. It's kind of a natural progression for Eddie, Venom, and the rest of the returning characters. It's still hampered by the occasional goo fight and some jumpy editing, but the visuals are much better this time around. Really, the main issue with this sequel is the villain. Now, the villain of the first film wasn't strong either, but Carnage is a much bigger part of this movie. I mean, he's so important that he's in the title. Woody Harrelson entertainingly hams things up, but both of our villain characters here are underdeveloped and end up feeling disappointingly mediocre. So that means my number one SSU film is Venom. Much like an extraterrestrial symbiote, this is a film that has continued to grow on me over the years. When I first saw it in the theater, I didn't really know what to expect, and I was not impressed with what I saw. But with subsequent rewatches, I've been able to embrace the cheesy 2000s throwback vibe. Once it became clear to me that it was intentional, it really worked for the movie and the characters. This movie does not take itself seriously at all. It knows it's silly and campy and runs with it. There are definitely still some issues here. The CGI goo fights are pretty rough for one, though still quite a bit better than Morbius' swirl fights. It's also got some script issues, including some occasionally rough dialogue and an underwhelming villain, but those are problems present in all of the SSU films. Venom is not a good movie. Really, none of the SSU movies have been good, but I genuinely enjoy Venom, because it's incredibly entertaining. Ridiculous and very stupid, but entertaining. The sequels are definitely fun too, and other not good SSU films that I sorta like, but this first movie is still the best for me on that front. And that's almost exclusively because of the relationship between Eddie Brock and Venom. Easily the highlight of this film. Their relationship is fully established at the start of the sequel, but here they're just getting to know each other, which results in some fun, silly banter and a whole lot of entertaining situational humor. Tom Hardy plays these Eddie Venom moments so well, and his array of facial expressions alone would earn this movie the top spot on this list. Alright, so that's my rankography of Sony's Spider-Man universe. 6 movies, 4 protagonists, and unintuitively, still no Spider-Man. What does your ranking look like? I'd love to see some reasoning for your order, so be sure to post it in the comments below. Remember, I've already reviewed all 6 of these movies, so you could check those videos out if you want some more in-depth discussion of each, as well as my ratings, pros and cons, and even tailored film recommendations. And if you're interested in buying any of these movies, I do have affiliate links for all of them in the description below. I get a small commission from anything you buy using one of my links, so I'd really appreciate it if you use them if you're in the market for any of these movies. Alright, so if you got some enjoyment, insight, or information out of this rankography, I'd appreciate it if you'd hit that like button. And if you haven't done so already, please hit subscribe if you're at it to see more videos like this, as well as movie reviews. Till next time, this has been Alyssa with Mainely Movies. The way life should be.